So guys, thanks for logging in to watch today's video. We've been joined by Laura Carter from Somerset Activity Sports Partnership, working in the Somerset area. And we're going to be focusing today very much on the kind of funding landscape in community sport. So it's great to have Laura with us today. And I'm going to hand over to Laura now. She's going to give us a little bit of detail about herself and then go through the information for you all.
Thanks very much, George. As George said, my name's Laura Carter and I work for Somerset Activity and Sports Partnership. We are one of many active partnerships across the country, and our main aim is to get people more healthier and happier in Somerset. And we're trying to do that through increasing levels of physical activity. My role specifically is workforce lead. So I work with coaches, volunteers and clubs just to try and support them to make sure that they're doing their bit to increase activity in the county. So yeah, after speaking to George, I said I put some guidance together with regards to applying for funding in the sport and activity sector. This really is just a bit of a basic introduction and overview. And if you have any further questions, I've popped my contact details on the final slide, so you're more than welcome to get in touch with me. So yeah, we will go on.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Okay, for this webinar, we've used the Sport England Small Grants programme just to lay out the guidance, because mainly Sport England are a huge funder of the sector, but also because a lot of other funders use very similar applications. So we thought it'd be a really good place to start, because a lot of the questions are the same. So we'll be going through a lot of what the application asks for and how you can answer those questions. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll feel more comfortable with the type of work Sport England and other funders want to support, what kind of questions are asked in applications and how you might answer them and what to include in your answers, and also know where to look for the insight needed to support your application, which is really, really important. So the funding aims for Sport England. Each fund will have slightly different aims and what they want to fund. So you need to make sure you check out exactly what they want to be giving their money to, so you can make sure your project's suitable for that fund, really. The funding aims for Sport England is getting inactive people more active. And when I spoke to George, he mentioned that you'd spoken about behaviour change models previously. Is that right, George?
Yeah, that's a really big focus of ours.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've probably seen it, but on the left-hand side is the behaviour change model that Sport England use. And we're really trying to get people into that section 4 and 5, that action and maintenance phase of their behaviour. So we're really looking to target those in the pre-contemplation, contemplation and preparation phase. So we want to get them moving from not doing anything to becoming more active. Also helping people get more regularly active. We know that there's people doing some exercise from the Active Life survey, which I know you're aware of, but we know they're not doing enough of it. So we want to get people moving to 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise a week, or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity. And you can see on the bottom of that page, it's got some Chief Medical Officer guidelines of how much activity people should be doing. People are often confused what's moderate, what's vigorous. A good way to remember it, if you can talk but can't sing when you're doing exercise, it's probably moderate exercise. If you can't sing and you can't talk, then it's vigorous exercise. So it's an easy way to remember it. We want to create positive attitudes by young people to activity. This is really important. We know that creating habits from a young age is much more beneficial than starting it later in life, and you can never get those benefits back if you start at a young age. Developing volunteers is really important for the community sport aspect. They want to promote this because they know the benefits are twofold, not only for the organisation people are volunteering for, but we also know there's huge benefits for the volunteer themselves. And I'm sure a lot of you guys volunteer yourself and you know the benefits, the social aspects, the skill development you can get from volunteering. Improving progression and inclusion in talent development. And this is specific for the Sport England Small Grants scheme, which focuses on those 14 and up. Obviously, other schemes, completely different ages, but Sport England quite often look at 14 and up because they have other revenues for looking at, school-age children.
So I think just to touch on that, I think it's really important just to think about here is looking at those kind of the funding aims of Sport England, think how that fits for yourselves listening to this in your individual roles, and how you can target those. So think about it's on both parts. You might already be doing some of this work with people that are inactive, for example. So it's a great opportunity there, but also thinking about actually if you're working with different groups. For example, here we're talking about 14 and up, or actually if you're working with a different group, how can what you do be applied to potentially those 14 and up? And you might change programs and things like that that might fall into funding aims, which is going to support you. So it's interesting to think about these and around these key aims when planning and designing programs moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm just going to touch on this really quickly. Eligibility, this is specific for the Sport England small grants, but it's pretty generic across most of the Sport England programmes. But obviously other funding streams will have different criteria. So Sport England, you can apply if you're a not-for-profit, voluntary or community club organisation. Charities and schools can apply, statutory bodies, so parish councils, local authorities, village hall committees, but it's not for individuals or commercial entities. And a lot of sports, well, a couple of sports such as football, in the first instance, they are expected to go to the Football Foundation for funding, and you might find some similar schemes with cricket and rugby as well. But for Sport England, as long as you're a constituted club and a bank account with 2 signatories, then you're likely to be able to apply. And I just wanted to highlight on this page as well, if you haven't come across it before, the Club Matters website. Have you come across that, George? Fab.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
brilliant.
really good. Couple things of note there out of that, just last 30 seconds or so, was a great bit of research there is obviously into the Club Matters website, and also things like the Football Foundation to explore more streams of funding and how they kind of what their role is within the sporting sector as well. So yeah, really glad that you know that.
Definitely, yeah. I can't rave about Club Matters enough. It's fantastic, just for any guidance you want on club development. And they've also, at the moment, got a really handy page for helping clubs through the coronavirus. So they've got some case studies and some really helpful information about, setting up online AGMs and committee meetings. So yeah, it's a bit of a sideline, but I love it. Okay, next one. So planning your project, this is where a lot of people fall down in their application because they're not quite clear enough on what they are talking about with regards to their project. So what is clear to you might not be clear to an assessor when you're writing it down. So you just need to make sure that it's coming across the way you want it to come across when it's being read. And so these are just some bullet points when you're thinking about putting your application together. That you've got really clear. So can you explain the need for the project? What impact are you looking for? How will you deliver it? How will you know if it's been or is successful? And how you might sustain the benefits of the project? The sustainability part of the application isn't a huge part of the application, but you do need to be thinking about actually when this funding ceases, how will we continue this? Are we going to train up volunteers, or are we going to signpost people to other avenues? A good tip here is to test the application out on someone completely not involved with the project. Ask them to read it and then reiterate back to you what they think you're planning to achieve. Hopefully not someone in sport and physical activity, someone completely separate. But then if they come back with something completely bizarre and you think, no, that's not what I was trying to do, then you need to revisit and write it again. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's a really great bit of advice and a really good bit of knowledge for us to have, is think about that. And I think particularly thinking specifically to our group, our network of individuals that will watch this, is something that we can get confused around sometimes. People don't always know what you do, if that makes sense. So actually, if you think you'd be really clear, really explain not only what you do, but why you do that, and also how that's obviously achieved, is going to be vital. So I think that's a great bit of advice in kind of linking with people maybe external to a project when working with it. So yeah, thanks for that again.
Definitely. Again, I'll just go through this really quickly. This is very small grants specific, but a lot of other funding programs will have similar stipulations, so you just need to be aware of them. The small grant scheme, you can claim between £300 and £10,000 for a project. Small grants, the whole project cost can be up to £50,000, but you can't claim more than £10,000 for that. The project cannot have already started, so you can't start it before you receive the funding. They're really funny about that, so make sure you read the terms properly. and small grants must be deliverable in a 3-year period. This used to be 12 months, but I think we've come to the realisation that changing behaviours can be quite time consuming and can be a long road. So they've extended that to a 3-year period. And partnership funding isn't needed for small grants. Some funders will require partnership funding, whether that's cash or in kind, but partnership funding for small grants is not needed. Okay. So the actual application form, again, this is specific to small grants, but it's very generic, the questions, so we'll just go through them. So description of your project. This part is almost like an elevator pitch. So you've got 30 seconds in a lift with someone to describe what your project is. You don't need a huge amount of detail, you just need to get the important points across. So it could be to set up a beginners running club in the Bridgewater area for women between 30 to 60 for 8 weeks, and then signposting them to parkrun at the end. Okay, so getting those important points across. Selecting your sport, which is on the small grants application. Where your project will happen. Sport England and a lot of other funders nowadays like to fund applications that putting money into areas of deprivation. And to find out where these areas of deprivation are, you can search via postcode. And one website that you can do this on is the Somerset Intelligence Network website. So if you have a project that's taking place in 6 different areas of Somerset, then you might want to look to see what those postcodes are, whether they're in areas of deprivation, and just select your postcode wisely for the main postcode you put on the application. But yeah, they do like, as well as a lot of other funders, to put money into those areas. So why is your project needed? This is a really, really important section of the application and on all applications. If it's not needed, then why should they fund it? And it's important that you do your research in this bit. It takes time, but it's worth it in the end. And I've just put down on this table some of the places you can find that information. So we've talked about the Somerset Intelligence Network. The Somerset Intelligence website not only has information about areas of deprivation, there's a huge amount of other information on there. I recently put together a volunteering application, and I used volunteering numbers from that website to include in the application, just so I had some local data I could use, just to, strengthen that application. And if you're a bit of a data geek like me, you can get down rabbit holes of information. It just goes on forever. It's quite interesting. And I know that you've been looking at the Active Life survey from Sport England. So again, you can search activity levels by postcode on that. So that's a great way to strengthen the application and say, you know what, activity levels in this area are low. This is why the project's needed. And also, a lot of funders like to see that you've referred to a wider strategy, whether that's a national governing body of sport strategy, a local authority, or an active partnership strategy such as SASP. And our strategy is on our website, and you can just have a look at that, and it sets out clearly what our priorities for the area are. So it might be that your application complements that, and you can include it in your application to funders, just to show that you've seen the wider picture of things. And getting evidence of demand from participants. It can be hard, but it can be done through questionnaires, focus groups, online surveys. But when you do this, make sure that you are surveying new participants and not existing participants. Okay, so that's where a lot of people fall down. They want to increase activity levels. They want to increase more people doing activity. So they don't want to hear about those people doing it already. Make sure you're getting the viewpoints of those not so active. And finally, on this one is some demographic specific output data. So if you were looking to do a project for people with physical disabilities, then you might want to go to the Activity Alliance website for more information on there. And also, if, for example, I've done a number of women's projects, the Women's Sport Foundation have a lot of insight and research, and it's just really showing that you've looked at those specific demographic information. So a lot of the Women's Sport Foundation research looks into how women prefer to be communicated with, what kind of deliverer they prefer, and all those kind of things. So it just takes into account that you've, again, thought about the wider picture. Yeah. So that's a really quick run through, but hopefully that will give you a few ideas of places you can look.
Great. No, that's really good, and I think it's great for the guys to go and look at some of these areas, because a lot of the conversations we've had in the past few weeks, and the guys will know this, is that we talk about how sometimes when delivering or being involved in projects and programs is sometimes being at the face end of that, you don't really understand the why that you're doing that, the reason why. You understand kind of what and how you're going to deliver the program, but you don't know the background for kind of seeds of it. And this is very much going to paint that picture for you. And I think when thinking about a funding project, for example, use these sources of information, Somerset Intelligent Network, for example, the Activity Alliance websites, for example, to support you within that funding bit, but also actually think about the programs that you're working on now, today, in the areas, and start to realise the reason why behind them, because it's going to help you be far more impactful with them. So that's, again, some really useful resources there. So thanks for that again.
I should have probably put it in the presentation, but have you heard of logic models before? Have you used a logic model?
I can't say that, no.
So I had some training on the use of a logic model, and you can Google them. They're everywhere, different kind of templates, and it's really good because it sets out what you want to achieve, starting with the outcomes and what you're trying to achieve, going through to, you know, the resources needed, timescales and things like that, and then it just keeps bringing you back to that original question of why your project's needed. So you're not doing anything that actually doesn't relate to that main aim of your project. Brilliant. So they can be quite useful. Okay. So again, the application form. So what difference will your project make? Often I've found this a real struggle, because you can think of a huge amount of, you know, differences that your project should make, and it's really hard to put it down in a way that's clear. On the left-hand side are Sport England's 5 outcomes, which they're looking to achieve. So physical well-being, mental well-being, individual development, social community development, and economic development. So actually for Sport England applications, it's really easy to answer that question, because you can refer back to those 5 things. They're not expecting you to cover them off at all, but it's a really good place to start. So physical health benefits, does it raise physical activity levels? And we know that there's a really strong link between physical and mental well-being. So is it going to have an impact on mental well-being? And social community benefits, individual development, you know, are people gaining different skills, skill development? Economic development is a really difficult one to show, especially in a small grants thing, but I just wanted to put it up anyway, just to show you that it's one of the 5 outcomes.
Definitely. No, I think again, they're really important. Like you said, there's you know, 90% of the time, there's actually a really strong relationship with those 5 areas, or particularly certainly the 4 areas. So it's really good to think about how that measuring that impact, or first of all trying to plot the impact, is thinking about how does it impact, you know, that your participants of the program within those areas. Yeah,
and I think it's really important as well, depending on what funding stream you're looking at, that you're speaking the language of the funders. And actually for the assessor, they've got a lot to assess. So actually, if you stated it in their 5 outcomes really clearly, how it ticks them off, it's job done, really.
Brilliant.
So it makes it a lot easier for them. Some common mistakes that people make. A lot of people focus on performance. So, you know, it'd be like my netball club putting an application in saying, we won the league this year, we won the cup, you know, we're amazing, we're fantastic. And we forget about actually what we want to do. We want to start a back to netball group that will encourage 30 women back to netball. So people focus on performance when it's not really needed. They want to know how you're going to get people active. And people focus on those already playing and present club members instead of asking new members what they want. And again, this small grant scheme, people focus on those under 14, and they don't want to focus on that for this. Again, specific for this, but just be aware of that criteria that your funders want.
Yeah, and I think again, that's so when looking at researching other funding streams that you can use, it's like you said, it's be aware of that and fit it around that. And I think we kind of alluded towards behaviour change earlier, and it's such a common theme through almost everything in the sport and physical activity industry at the moment. It's about getting the people that are disengaged engaged, and we have many conversations around how, as a nation, but also as an industry, we can be a bit guilty of getting those people that are already involved, you know, creating more opportunities for them and getting them to re-sign up to other areas. But actually, the real big challenge, and for the guys listening as community support and health officers, your goal and your reason why and your job is to get new people into a door, but also to get them to stay there. So keep thinking about that throughout this is what you need to keep thinking back to.
Yeah, and just working with other partners really to, you get them started and then signposting them somewhere they can, maintain that habit, hopefully. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. So how will you make it happen? Who will take part and how will you reach them? How are you going to promote to the people that you want to target? Often you will be targeting a specific demographic. Are you going to use local notice boards? Are you going to offer taster sessions for people? Are you going to use social media? Are you going to use Facebook and do targeted paid promotions? In that case, you might need some resource for that, so make sure you budget for it. And again, if you're targeting women, it might be useful to look at social media usage. So women, Facebook would be a good place to start maybe. If you're looking to target 18 to 25-year-olds, maybe Instagram would be a great place to start promoting. So just think about how you'll reach your target audience. When and where will it take place? Do some research into see if there's any venues available for when you want it to take place, if there's anything around. Does it clash with another session? Is the day and time suitable for that target audience? So if you were putting on a mum's running group, maybe 9 o'clock after the school drop off would be a good time, or maybe in the evening when they've got different childcare arrangements they could make. So just think about what would be suitable for your target audience. How long will the sessions last? Again, you don't want them to last too long, but you want it to be worth their while coming out. And who is going to lead the project? Sometimes they like to know this, and a lot of some funders like to know exactly what their qualifications are. Not all of them, but you might need to put that down. Just think about that. Who is going to lead the project? Although it doesn't necessarily matter for the application form, for your actual project, it is so important. You've probably discussed this numerous times before. Having the right deliverer is key, because if I am running one of my women's groups and I've got a military PT instructor stood up there, they're probably not going to it's not going to be the best person to deliver to them. So just they might want someone slightly more with a bit more empathy. So just have a real think about who the deliverer is, because it is the key to making people come back often. That is
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's start to think about the whole program, and there is a lot to think about, but those kind of sometimes those finer elements that maybe you don't think about early days are going to have a massive impact on the way that program performs. But just thinking again for the guys listening to community support health officers is think about we've done some work on kind of customer insight, and think about when we're designing programs is what we need to design that based around what the need is already, and this very much relates to that. Let's make sure that the venue, the time, all those things that you discussed that we're considering, it's going to best suit the individuals taking part in the program, and running, for example, an evening session, for example, for netball's back to netball type program where you're targeting women, for example. That's probably not the best time because they've got other responsibilities and commitments. So evaluate that, look at the data, the information on that prior to making your decision. So it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of funders will also ask for a project plan, like the small grant scheme. So I've just put it slightly bigger there. So you've got your objectives on the left, similar to how a logic model works, which I was talking about earlier. You've got your really clear actions. I think sometimes we can get caught up in just waffling on in applications and not putting clear actions down. Clear actions will help keep you to a task with those timescales and the resources needed as well, which you can see in there. And it's a really great thing to do, not only for yourself, but actually for other committee members or other staff members, so they can see really clearly as well what you're trying to get out of it, and what your aims are, and timescales, etc. So really useful to do.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So sustainability measures and costs. And again, I said earlier, it's not a huge part of the application sometimes, sustainability, but it is important that you've thought about it. So again, like I mentioned, are you going to be training volunteers up, for example, run leaders, if you started a running group, so they can continue the project, or are you going to be signposting them, for example, to parkrun afterwards? Will you work in partnership? Again, it's not necessary for certain applications, but it's always good to show that you're not working in isolation on a project. So again, this could be with Parkrun, or it could be with Slimming World to promote your running project. And the measures of the project will vary greatly depending on who the funder is, but it's important that you look closely to what you might have to measure and the information you need to gather. So it could include age, ethnicity, gender, disability. What I would say from experience, don't just assume if it hasn't got any measures that you don't have to measure anything. Always double check with the funder, because you don't want to be in the situation down the road where, oh, I've got to now look at that retrospectively and gather that data. And because of GDPR now, you can't just go gathering everything. So you need to be really clear on what you do need to gather. Okay.
Yeah, really important, I think, that, and it's I my personal opinion, and not be from a funding side like yourself, but would be is I would always try and get myself into a mindset where I'm planning ahead for that anyway, even if it's maybe not required at times.
Yeah.
Because it's only going to help you to progress the program project for next time, or to continue the development of it. So yeah, always be aware of that would be my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, costs on this. Map all the costs often, and not just the ones you're requiring from that funder. They like to see the total cost of the project. So, for example, the whole project might cost 13,000, but you're only claiming 6,000 from Sport England. They want to know about that whole 13,000. And include partnership funding if you have it. Again, for this scheme, not necessary. Okay, just some documentation you might need to hand in with some funding, with a funding application. So the constitution, the most recent financial accounts, last 3 bank statements, safeguarding policies if relevant. If you're working with under 18s, you'll need obviously a child safeguarding policy, and if you're working with adults at risk, then you'll need an adult safeguarding policy as well. And I've popped 2 graphics down there. You've probably come across them. The CPSU, the Child Protection in Sport unit, they've got some really great templates and information on there to develop a child protection policy. And the Anne Craft Trust, exactly the same, but dealing with adults at risk. So there's some really good resources on there. Evidence of partnership funding, again, cash or in kind if you've got it. NGB affiliation and your project plan. That's what you need to put on for there. And finally, just some other funding options that SASP have used recently, because I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour of what we use in Somerset. So we get quite a bit of funding from Sport England because they are a major funder. We've been doing more work with public health over the last few years. Sport England changed their direction from quite sport focused to increasing activity levels, more so than looking down that traditional working with sports clubs and NGBs. Still do that, but not quite as much as they used to. So we have found that a lot of our aims fit really well with public health. So we've been working with public health quite a bit, and we received some funding from them to deliver certain projects. Children in need, we run some inclusive sessions, which we get funding from Children in Need for. And again, all these funders have slightly different requirements, so it's really important to read through what you're signing up to. Local authorities we work with, and we also do some work with Somerset Skills and Learning, and they're a really good example of a funder asking for slightly different information. So Sport England might ask who's going to lead the project, but Somerset Skills and Learning want to know the DBS details and safeguarding training dates of the people delivering it. So they just go into slightly more detail on different aspects. We've also worked with the police, Department for Work and Pensions, housing associations and other charities. And it's often about finding those partners that share your aims so you can work together to achieve something greater, really. So it's just about having a look around. But hopefully there's some different ideas for you there. And I've just chucked my contact details down. So if you do have any questions, please feel free just to drop me a line.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much for that. It's really helpful. I think just then, I'm hoping now that kind of when people are watching this, they're starting to think about the vast array of funding options that are out there. I mean, obviously today we've spoken very much about the Sport England Small Grants Fund, which is great. So read up more about that so you can understand that. But also, just looking at the list that's currently on the screen now, particularly through Sporting and the likes of public health, there is loads of funding out there. Again, think about your local area as well. We've talked there about Somerset Skills and Learning. Think about if you're not in Somerset, if you're based in Dorset or wider afield, think about the other funding streams that are going to be available in your area, because there'll be very similar partnerships or funding pots or different funding pots for the area that you live in. And all this is going to be really important for you to think about your successful funding. So Laura, thanks for that, because you've given us loads of really good detail. You've given us loads of really good avenues for other funding streams, other sources of information, which is really helpful. I think, could I just ask just a couple of questions just to kind of wrap up with?
Yeah.
Just what, and I think you've been very much talking about this throughout, but I suppose it's just, in summary, what makes, and I know, and maybe a bit generic as well, this one, but what makes a successful funding bid? What's the kind of main makeup? Is there 3 key elements or something like that you would say is something that's successful versus unsuccessful?
I would say there's main elements. I think it's being really clear in what you want to achieve, firstly, and making sure you've got quite clear action points. I think I mentioned before that you can get down this road of waffling on and, you tie yourself up in knots a bit. So making sure things are really clear and concise. They're not looking for war and peace. They are looking for something they can make sense of. And just making sure that actually what you're aiming to achieve fits in with their priorities. And then you can't go too far wrong if there's a really clear link.
Right.
So, yeah,
brilliant. And I think, again, that understanding why, and I think the examples, again, that why is a big word. We use it all the time. Why are we doing this is vital. And I think, again, there was some great advice in there around actually, can you explain this to somebody that maybe doesn't understand it as well as you, or is from a different industry? And if your point is coming across to them, we know that they're coming across to everybody. So that was some great advice for everybody. I suppose the next one is, a lot of these funding pots, for the guys listening, they need to understand the landscape for sport. So how does that work from a funding point of view? Where does this money come from? How does it end up in the pockets of Sport England, for example?
So Sport England gain some funding from the government as well as some national lottery funding. So they've got a couple of different avenues it comes into them from. And then they can distribute it down to people like active partnerships, such as us, directly, or they can put in programs in place. So we have to apply for, I don't know if you've heard the Satellite Club program. Yeah. So we apply to them so that we can receive funding to deliver the Satellite Club program locally. And then obviously they've got their facilities fund, they have their small grants fund for more local individual clubs and organisations to apply for as well. So it does vary quite a bit. One thing I will say, the small grants fund is actually closed at the moment because of coronavirus, because they've been focusing elsewhere. But I've no doubt it will come back online. But yeah, they are focusing on getting people through this phase, which is really great. They're being really flexible with their funding and looking at ways they can support people going forwards.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And I think just I mentioned to the guys there, if they go onto the Sport England website now, and you'll see the small grants fund, you'll see the community asset fund as well, the other funds available on there. And I think, to be fair, the majority of them will say they're closed, but the information's still there. You can still digest it and see various information and find out about those funds. So that's really important. I think I just want to touch on another point as well that you made, obviously looking at kind of Sport England's 5 key strands within the project plan. And you also mentioned how the active partnership, so remember Somerset Active Sports Partnership is an active partnership, how that's kind of in recent years changed the mindset for you as an organisation. You mentioned, and I think, again, just in my mind, I'm linking back to that behaviour change over time, is how that's kind of changed your focus as an organisation from probably from 5 years ago to today, for example.
Yeah, it has been quite a big change for me personally. When I first started at SASP, my title was coaching lead, and I worked mainly with governing bodies, trying to help them develop their coaching plans, to making sure they had enough coaches in the area. And so a good way, if it's just showing what a journey we've come on, it's now the workforce plan. And yes, I do a tiny bit with governing bodies, but I'm, working with other partners to see how we can, increase the workforce generically, whether that's training up walk leader volunteers or, developing, we've got our Move More volunteer program as well. We encourage local members of the community to be sort of champions to encourage physical activity in their community. So it's just looking at going away from that traditional sport to looking at that physical activity side of things. Definitely. So it has been a massive change. And personally, when I've come from a sport background, I worked for Sport England a few years ago. So coming from that traditional real sport, netball, hockey, football, rugby, to come into this physical activity as a whole, it does take a bit of time to get used to, but we're definitely there now, and we've fully embraced it. Brilliant,
that's great. And it's something that we talk about, and I say at the moment, and I mean this with a bit of tongue in cheek, but it's forget sport. Sport's important, it's really vital, but actually Vits just creates something that's, first of all, probably something that's quite fun that people want to do and they're going to come back to do, and also open your boundaries a little bit, because we can be and I'm guilty of it, like my head's football, everything I do is football, but actually I'm closing off so many members of the community with that mindset. It's start to think, look wider than particularly your comfort zone or the comfort zone you're used to in terms of sport, and start to think, outside of the box and create more opportunities because of that. So it's really powerful.
Yeah, no, definitely, especially for the apprentices, what they're trying to do, definitely look at that physical activity side of things a lot more. Obviously for us, we are still interested in the sports stuff because it's such a huge market for us, and so many people access it.
It's that next step.
Yeah, completely.
Get to the door, get them having fun. When it turns out, if you enjoy, and like you said, that kind of end goal, if that conveyor belt of the journey that you're trying to get the person to go onto is just get them into the room enjoying it. Oh, actually, it turns out I am quite a keen. I like hockey, or I played hockey when I was younger. Right. Well, as it goes, in your area, I know of 5 and 6 rugby clubs, hockey clubs that you can go and join, and then that you can let somebody else that's in that field take that journey further, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Good stuff. So Laura, thanks for that. That was
no worries at all.
Useful. So again, you can see the contact details there on there. So if you want to look at SASPort, Laura's very kindly opened to some questions, particularly for you guys that are local. I'm sure there's probably a crossover within your role at some point on projects and stuff you've been working into, or potential stuff you might want to explore. So brilliant. Thanks guys for watching. And hope you found that beneficial.